Hello, this is Sharon from SAS Statistical Programming. In this tutorial, we're going to look at two more SAS date functions, DATDIF and YRDIF. Those two functions calculate the difference in days and years between two SAS dates. So this is the general form for those two functions. DATDIF, in the parentheses, we have start date, end date, and basis. And for YRDIF, it's the same form, start date, end date, and basis. For start date, it specifies the starting date as a SAS date value, and end date specifies the ending date as a SAS date value. And the basis specifies a character constant or variable that describes how SAS calculate the date difference. So we have four bases. All four bases are valid for YRDIF, and only the first two bases are valid for DATDIF function. For example, for the first basis, 30/360, it specifies a 30-day month and a 360-day per year. SAS will use those two numbers to calculate date difference and year difference. And for the second one, ACT/ACT, it uses the actual number of days or years between dates. And thirdly, for ACT/360, it uses the actual number of days between dates in calculating the number of years, which is calculated by the number of days divided by 360. And lastly, for ACT/365, it still uses the actual number of days between dates, but for calculating years, the dates divided by 365 instead of 360. This table shows the four YRDIF functions. They use the same start date and the same end date, and each function uses one of the bases. And we can see each one returns slightly different value for difference in years.
Now let's look at the SAS program for this video. First, I use proc import procedure to bring in an Excel data file. It's called SAS date. And then the output SAS dataset is score data 0. So let's run this procedure. So we can have our dataset, the SAS dataset, score data 0 ready. So in this dataset, there are many variables. One variable I'm going to use to do the further calculation is this start date. So let's go back to the code window. In this data step, the input SAS dataset is score data 0, and the output SAS dataset is score data 1. So there are total 6 new variables will be generated in this data step program. The first one, I'm using YRDIF, this function, to calculate the year difference between the start date and also the today's date. This is a function today, so it returns a SAS date value for today. And here is the basis I'm using for this function. It's 30/360. So that means I'm using 30 days months and 360 days a year to do the calculation. After the calculation is done, then the return value will be assigned to this new variable, which is year DIF1. And then the second one, I'm still using YRDIF to calculate the year difference between the start date and today's date. Today's date is September 14, 2015. So I include this actual date here. So in order to do the calculation, SAS needs to convert this actual date to a SAS date value to do the calculation. So that's why I include this actual date, and I also include this in quotation marks and then followed by a D. So in this, we'll convert this September 14, 2015 to a SAS date value that can be used for this calculation. And another difference here is the basis here I'm using is ACT/ACT. So that means I'm using the actual days and also the actual years between the two dates. And also the returning value from this function will be assigned to this new variable, which is YRDIF2. And the third one, the basis I'm using is ACT and /360. So that means I'm using the actual dates between the two dates, and also 360 days a year to do the calculation. And then the last one, I'm using the actual today's date and then convert it to a SAS date value. And then there is a little d after that. So this can convert this date to a SAS date value for calculation. And then the basis, I'm using the actual dates between the start date and then today's date, and also using 365 days a year to do the calculation. So basically there are 4 variables using different bases. But I want to include all of them here just to show you, because we choose using different bases, then the outcomes will be different too. And this one, I'm using DATDIF function to do the calculation, to calculate the date difference between the start date and today's date. And the first one, the basis I'm using is 30 days per month, and also 360 days a year to do the calculation. And then this one, I'm using the actual dates between the start date and today's date, and also the actual years between the start date and the today's date. And then the returned value will assign to this new variable, DATDIF2. So I list 2 here to show when we use the different bases, the outcome will be different slightly. So let's run this program. This is the output SAS dataset score data 1. Let's look at the new variable generated. This is the start date. This is the original date variable we use in the original data file. And this is the year difference 1, and this is the year difference 2, and then this year difference 3, and this is the year difference 4. We can see there are slight differences in between those 4 year difference because we use different bases to do the calculation. And for day difference 1 and day difference 2, there are slight difference between the values in those 2 variables as well, because we use the different bases to do the calculation. Alright, so next I include a proc print procedure here to print out this new dataset score data 1. Let's run this procedure. Basically, this output shows the exact same information for the data. But if you want to print out an output, have a better look, then you can do this proc print procedure. So again, this is the start date, and here is the year difference 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the 2 day difference variables, 1 and 2. Alright, so let's go back to the code window. So this concludes this video. So in this video, we talked about 2 new SAS date functions. One is DATDIF, and another one is YRDIF. And we can use them to calculate the date or year difference between the 2 dates. Alright, this is it. Thank you for watching.